Hit the start broadcast button. Sooner or later, it says this hanging out on air is live. I'm live. So I titled this video because I don't really put out videos that much. 2 years after, essentially my declaration of wanting to learn functional programming and actually like going full throttle in it. And that's been exactly what I did. I went full throttle roughly 2 years ago, virgin to this functional programming paradigm, this functional programming ecosystem, right? The people, the tools, the um, open source community, some of the minds that I've attracted to my reality, and it's been interesting. It amazes me the paths that one can choose by simply being aware of decisions and executing on one of them. And so it's strange how like maybe roughly 24 months ago, where everything is object programming, everything's C sharp. Thing was oddly behavior and state coupled together into a class or a module, depending on the definition. And my journey and the people that I've interacted with and the new challenges that I have faced basically has made me prejudice towards the notion of object-oriented programming when it comes to domain modeling. Specifically, I still think it's a great idea. I think object-oriented programming is probably one of the best techniques known to man today for building expressive user interfaces or user experiences. And that I say that based on my experience or my ignorance of doing Elm programming, which is more likely ignorance, where things just seem to, I feel, just fall into place when doing, MVVM, data binding, all that stuff that I've learned from WPF and that I've extended or migrated to Xamarin Forms. But so I still favor object-oriented programming when building a user experience with emphasis on UI logic, right? But in regards to domain modeling, I think functional programming, it just makes sense as of right now. And it makes sense based on the options that are currently available. Options are currently available that I'm aware of: object-oriented programming or functional programming. And with object-oriented programming, I believe that there's just a higher probability of a failure. More specifically, I believe there's a higher probability of getting to a point of no return, where it becomes more difficult to undo what has already been done. Because I believe that with object-oriented programming, it's very dependency focused, and dependencies usually become the hostage. I don't know how to articulate that any other way. I mean, there's a analogy of, all you wanted was a banana, but then you have like a monkey attached to the banana that's holding on to it. You have the tree that the monkey's hanging on to with the banana, and then that tree belongs to the jungle, and you have to pull all this stuff in. I'm sure I butchered that analogy or illustration, but that's something that I believe functional programming, based on my personal experience, I haven't really had to deal with at that level. Now, do I think functional programming is a silver bullet? No, I don't. And I say that based on my experience of working on an open source project for 4 months, approaching 5 months, and realizing that it's just as easy to get into technical debt as it is with object-oriented programming. The difference between technical debt with functional programming versus technical debt with object-oriented programming is the fact that, at least with the technical debt that I have accrued with functional programming, it's still testable. It's still testable. The question is it really worth me writing tests based on the type of code or legacy code that has developed over time? And that's a different decision point. But again, the difference is legacy code from object-oriented programming, I believe by definition, with a slight hint of Michael Feathers, is code without tests. With programming, have code, you add tests as is my experience. However, it doesn't necessarily mean that you continue forward. So said, I've gained 2 years of my journey. You can still get technical debt, right? You can still write legacy code, maybe not so much based on the definition that most people hang on to of legacy code, but you can still write some code that you're not proud of in functional programming. And I've done that. And sometimes I've purposely done it to cut corners, to hit a milestone, and still apply the Boy Scout rule, and every day revisit parts that I'm not too proud of and clean it up so it's more presentable compared to what it was before, whatever the grammar is. So that's something that I've noticed is technical debt can still be accrued 2 years into my journey of learning functional programming. Now, what else? Well, I'm no longer affiliated with people that just do plain object-oriented programming or C#. In fact, I will say that 2 years of going full throttle in this functional programming and actually being a spec or a cell within this ecosystem of functional programming, there's some things that I just scratch my head on when I observe some of the problems or challenges that developers are facing. And so, yeah, from time to time, I still interview with companies, but I've learned to scrutinize companies a lot more, and I've learned to really interview companies just as much as they interview me, where I really want to know what problems you're solving, and this is still related to functional programming. And so I'll start digging into that, and I realize that they still have this hammer, and they're still trying to treat everything as a nail, and it's true. And I'll look at that, for example, when they talk about, I'm not an expert on concurrency or parallelism, whatever. Yeah, there's a difference. I can't really articulate what that difference is, but they they will still discuss race conditions, right? Deadlocks, whatever that stuff is, semaphores, whatever, mutexes, all that stuff that, once upon a time I knew the definition of, but I'm just not concerned anymore just because within functional programming, it doesn't exist. There's no such thing as state. There's only input, right? And so I'll listen to some of the or I'll observe some of the problems that these lead developers, senior developers are experiencing, and how they're trying to come up with designs to address these challenges when they can just stop trying to address these challenges with the tools that they've been doing or that they've been using. Instead, take a step back and say, well, what can we do so that we don't have to even acknowledge this challenge, because the challenge just doesn't exist. And so that's the part that really functional programming got me hip to. Now, does functional programming expose challenges? I think so. I think that again, I'm 2 years into this journey, and I think with functional programming, especially with Elm, and I haven't really dug into the implementation details of the Elm programming language, but I feel that, well, if you make copies of everything because of immutability, right, which is one of the main cores or the main, I don't know, for lack of a better term, I can't think of a right word. I don't want to say symptoms, but it's one of the main pillars of functional programming, immutability. Well, that means that you make deep copies of thing. That's my understanding, and that can lead to performance degradation of specific context. I don't know if that's, but anyway, like there's certain things that you may have to consider, and I'm somewhat learning this with Elm programming, and maybe that's not so much the issue as it is my own fault with picking the wrong data structures. So, for example, functional programming, you use lists all the time, and I'm learning that, well, that's all fine and dandy, but now what happens when I have tens of thousands of users on Nikeza? Nikeza is a project that I'm working on right now, or 100,000 or 1,000,000. Is a list really the best way to manage everything? And I'm learning, well, more than likely it's not, because I mean, I didn't really do well in data structures and algorithms, but I think the big O notation is like O of n. Well, I could be wrong. So like a list is like a no-go, and I'm learning that. So there's certain data structures which are supported, like dictionary or dict. But to make a long story short, and I'm going off on a tangent, I don't even remember why I even went on this specific thread. You still run into design challenges in which you still have to understand data structures and algorithms. And well, this is where object-oriented programming may come back into play, because some algorithms are based on actual objects. So that's something to consider. What else? Let me talk about something else. Let me stop looking at my phone. 2 years into my journey, I'm now affiliated with people that, well, are kind of like me. They have also decided to take the alternative pill, or just take a pill in general, and they have been going full throttle on functional programming. Maybe not so much as I have, but people that are invested, I believe, tend to, or people that care more about software development, they tend to know something about functional programming. They tend to pick Elixir or Scala or F Sharp. Translated, people that I respect, people that I really I really am interested in knowing or understanding what you think about this specific topic. They're functional programmers. They are people that have adopted an alternative paradigm. And I'm not sure if adopted is the right term. They're people that are aware of alternative techniques of solving a problem. So to make long story short, I'm I have interacted with people that I respect because they are more aware of what's out there and they're not just stuck on doing something only one way. So, is there anything else I could discuss in my 2-year journey? Yeah, I'm still learning functional programming. Some things, I mean, you could look at half of my points or 3/4 of my points on Stack Overflow, because I think I'm approaching 5,000 right now, 5,000 points on Stack Overflow. Um, they're not for me answering questions; they're for me asking questions. And so, there's a lot of questions where I'm not embarrassed. It's just it's a language, and I just don't know. So there's some, of course, now some simple questions that I've asked in the past 24 months that now it's like I automatically think in this type of paradigm. Map, filter, reduce. Those are the main building blocks of functional programming. So the majority of the questions that I've asked in the past can pretty much be related to map, filter, reduce when it comes to doing anything, right? And then you have more involved, or shall I say complex functions that are really built off of those three fundamental functions: map, filter, reduce. So to make long story short, some of my questions that I ask now on what used to be Stack Overflow, it still is Stack Overflow, but people kind of force me to use the Slack channel. A lot of these camps, I'm sure not just functional programming camps, a lot of these camps, I don't know why, but they choose to Slack over Stack Overflow. I don't understand that. I don't like Slack. So I my question on Stack Overflow and I copy link on Slack just so that they can, I don't know, whatever. That's a tangent too. But what I was going to say is I'm pretty content with the progress that I've made because I'm asking more involved or more complex questions than what I used to ask a year ago or 6 months ago, really, where because I started actually building a fairly involved application or product, whatever you want to call it, like some of the questions obviously that I've asked in the past on Stack Overflow, they're very, very basic, very, very beginner. And now the questions that I'm asking are more of user experience related, more of performance related, right? So to make long story short, I, I sincerely believe, and I say this with humility, I leveled up maybe maybe exactly 2 years after I made my declaration of learning functional programming, where there's a difference in the questions that I ask now. For the most part, there's a difference in the questions I ask now, where I used to ask very basic questions related to, I don't know, how to extract data, to now my questions are just recently now being more geared towards performance related questions with functional programming. Um, and when you're using functional programming for the UI, hence Elm, well, UI related questions to that are somewhat related to functional programming. So I discussed just the paradigm shift. Did I discuss the paradigm shift? I think so. I went from everything being tightly coupled of behaviors and state, or behavior and state being tightly coupled. This is what we call a class. To now, there's a separation. It's either a data transfer object or it's an operation, and that's it. Which leads me to this: the way that I build, the way that I write code is completely different, right? So yes, when I'm building something that is for a client, there is absolutely no debate. There is no question. There will be automated checks and balances, which is a fancy expression or term for there will be unit tests. There has to be. I'm not going to spend the majority of the consumer, or I'm not going to spend the majority of the client's budget on debugging things that really could have been handled a lot earlier, right? Translated, debugging code that shouldn't really be debugged at the length that I'm doing it. It's preventable if I just use discipline. So with that said, when I'm doing functional programming, the way that is different from object-oriented programming, when I used to build systems, is with object-oriented programming, I used to take my imagination and I used to say, okay, so there's going to be this class called, I don't know, class XYZ. And class XYZ is going to be responsible for maintaining this or doing that, right? This whole single responsibility principle. Now I'm going to have this other class, and it's going to be severely focused on doing this other thing. And they're both going to have this state, or they're both going to expose these properties, which is translated to they're going to have this type of state. And they're going to have these methods, right, which is publicly exposed. And this is how they're going to work together. This is how they're going to collaborate together. So I would like take my imagination, which I have a really sick imagination, and I would imagine all the different types of classes at runtime that would be objects and how they would work in harmony with each other to deliver some type of results that the system is responsible for. That's the way I used to think. I don't do that anymore. Now, because I took the FP pill, now I say, okay, what does my system need to do? My system needs to do X, Y, and Z. Okay. So what are main operations of X? Well, main operations or X is do this. Okay. So the first thing I do is I write a function, but a function is kind of overloaded. So when I build systems, the very first thing that I do is I define the operations that the systems have to perform. Okay. I no longer think about classes. I no longer think about methods and properties. I only think about operations that a system has to perform. And I say, well, this system, thou shalt perform this operation. It has to perform that operation. And it has to perform this other operation. So I write out my module that reflects, I don't know, whatever important component that the system is supposed to reflect. And I write the operations. I don't care about the implementation details of the operations. I just care about the function signature. And that's it, right? And then I say, okay, so I identify the operations within my system. Now what? Well, the operations, they're defined, but they don't really deliver. All right, well, how do I make these operations relevant, right? Okay, well, and that's when I start writing my unit tests, right? So I don't like saying unit tests because it's not really by definition a unit test. That's when I start writing my automated tests. I don't really, which is something else that over time when I'm building an application, I don't really use the REPL. The read, evaluate, print loop. I don't use it, right? I don't. Now, if I need to test some type of string manipulation function that I'm trying to create, I'll use the REPL. But in general, when I'm just building a system, I don't really use the REPL. I write unit tests. Specifically, I use a library called FSUnit. I use NUnit. And that's pretty much all that I need. So I'll write my unit tests to basically help me focus on what this operation needs to do to deliver the result that the client needs to have. And I'll just, okay. I mean, unit tests, it helps me focus and it gets me to where I need to go. So that hasn't changed. I was doing, automated tests and object-oriented programming. I do automated tests and functional programming. The difference is I don't always do TDD, right? I don't always do test-driven development. I do test-driven development religiously in object-oriented programming, but in functional programming, there's certain functions that I just don't I just don't have to do it, right? But if I start getting stuck on something, then I do. So if it's a function that is pure domain logic and that's it, it doesn't interface with any external systems, then sometimes I just don't have to do it, right? However, if it does interact with some external system, then it has to be done. I write an automated test for it. And so like, I mean, I could share my screen. I'm not sure how helpful that would be. Yeah, I'll share my screen. Okay. So like when I'm getting ready to, I don't know what the phrase is, connect the rubber to the road, then yeah, I write hella integration tests. So example of hella integration tests is like, well, you see this thing right here called integration test.fs. Okay. And so, unfortunately within the editor that I'm using, maybe it's different if I use Visual Studio instead of Visual Studio Code. Because maybe then I can actually collapse the test to show you at a high level what they look like. Because in Visual Studio Code, specifically Ionide, they're not collapsible. So like, it's easy to get overwhelmed with all this gibberish that I have, right? Now, if I go into Visual Studio as the preferred IDE, even though it doesn't support .NET Core like Ionide does, that's in Visual Studio Code IDE, well, there's a huge difference. Hold up. So hold up, but I don't see any collapse. Yeah, I can't collapse this either. No, can I? Hold up. Control MO. No, nothing's collapsible. Anyway, what I wanted to say is this is an example of some integration tests that I wrote. And I know this looks cryptic because it looks cryptic to me, but an example of an integration test is this is one I just wrote. I haven't tested it yet. I mean, I haven't executed the actual test, but I still, for the most part, will always document the different stages of my test. Well, this is missing a space. OCD taking over. Okay, the different stages of a test. There will always be a setup. There will always be a test. There will always be a verify. Those will always be the core tenets of a test. The fourth one would be a teardown or a cleanup, interchangeable terms. But in functional programming, you still have your automated tests, aka unit tests, depending on the loose definition of it. The difference is, well, you can have hella pipe operators, for lack of a better term. And so, not pipe operators, but I don't know, I'll call them feed operators. You take data and you feed it into a function. And so, I'm not sure if I can find a good example, but some unit tests look pretty, I don't know, they look pretty cool. But I don't see a good example. This get profile image from Stack Overflow says, hey, Stack Overflow, get the thumbnail. What is the Stack Overflow over here? All right, I'm getting off topic. Anyway, these are examples of some integration tests that I wrote that it hasn't changed between me writing tests in object-oriented programming versus me writing tests in functional programming. Let me stop presenting my desktop. Is there anything else I want to talk about? I'm not sure. Maybe I should. I see I have a viewer. Maybe I should see if they actually put any comments down so I could potentially address it. How do you do this? So if there's no comments, I'm probably going to wrap this up. hit stop. I don't see any comments in the live chat. And is there anything else I can mention that I would like to identify? 2 years in Jake Podkansky, Jacek. I can't say your name, but hi. Is there anything else specifically that you want me to discuss based on my experience 2 years into functional programming before I terminate this live stream? Jacek, I don't know how to say your name. If you can provide the phonetic spelling, then that would be nice. It doesn't really report if he's typing anything or not, but as I wait to see if he responds with anything, with any comment or question, I would say I discuss. Well, the ecosystem is different, so I haven't really used this professionally yet, but property-based testing is something that is a game changer that no one, I think, is really aware of. I'm reading this comment. Property-based testing is something that I think the majority of people just are not going to be aware of in object-oriented programming. And so, with that said, I haven't really used it professionally yet because, well, I just haven't. However, yeah, because I haven't really ran into something that is so complex where I need to generate all the different edge cases so that I can make sure that it's really handled. So I'm referring to my Nikeza project, but that's something, property-based testing is something that I have come to respect and definitely will leverage when the occasion, when the opportunity permits itself. All right, so let me look at what he's saying. He says, feel free to terminate. Phonetic spelling is Yatsek. Okay, Yatsek. He says, I'm playing occasionally with functional programming. Okay. I have wasted 2 weeks trying to run Haskell properly on Windows. Okay. I want to build a cross-platform desktop application. Okay. I like your videos and you have shared some important insights hard to find elsewhere. Thanks. My videos are usually brain dumps. I appreciate the encouragement because honestly, I don't think many people look at my videos. But yeah, I think like you, I find it hard to find videos of people that are kind of like at the level that I'm at, where they're maybe a little bit beyond beginner of functional programming. And so like the majority of the videos that I see are really by expert, or what I would think are expert functional programmers. But it feels good to try to get an understanding of someone that went from object-oriented programming to functional programming and what they think of it. And so there's Adam Wright. He's a person that has provided a website. I think it's called like F# for C# something something. But if you Google Adam Wright, he has worked on a platform to help object-oriented programmers, specifically C# developers, migrate into functional programming, specifically with F#. Let me read what you said. You said some people you spoke with were more honest than usual about challenges faced by programmers. Some people you spoke with were more honest than usual about challenges faced by programmers. Are we still talking about functional programming, or are we talking about like soft skills and politics? I mean, I could talk about either one. It doesn't matter to me. I don't have to stay with the agenda or the subject. but I was saying, I found it difficult to find YouTube videos on people that actually want to record their journey. I think I'm the only person that's recording my journey of functional programming. Um, and so like it's kind of challenging because a lot of the videos are produced by people that are fairly advanced in functional programming. And sometimes I'm not as interested in core functional programming concepts. Sometimes I just want to be able to relate to somebody that's not yet an expert, but kind of get an understanding of their evaluation of where they're at, some of the pitfalls that they're running into, and some of the moments that they have embraced, their realizations. And like that's a little bit harder, I guess, is meta videos about functional programming versus actual syntax and this is how you do this, that, and the other. Sometimes I want the human connection to functional programming with people that are a little bit ahead of me, or even like at the same pace that I'm at. And that's something that I wish there, again, more videos would be produced on kind of the meta functional programming versus the actual programming constructs. So let me see what you said. You said some people spoke with you more honest about the challenges faced by programmers. Then you said soft skills and politics. Also, I am annoyed by some people. Where are we at? I, I lost my place because it's still updating the chat and it automatically down scrolls. So let me try to find my. Oh yeah, you said also I am annoyed by some people overselling their favorite technology. Yeah, I think I might also be someone that oversells my favorite technologies. But you should see some of the. I wrote a blog post on why I hate architects. I think my blog post is called Architects Are Irrelevant. And one of the main reasons is because I don't think they actually know the technology, but they're telling other people to use it, and that they don't really embrace. My biggest argument with architects that I wrote about is they get paid to make premature decisions. They have an opportunity to acknowledge a potential challenge, but that challenge can be postponed, right? It doesn't have to be confronted now. And when it's postponed, more information can trickle in, and then they can make more informed decisions when they have to actually confront that issue or that challenge. And majority of architects are just not mature like that. They're immature. They get paid to make premature decisions, and it's unfortunate. I want to drop one of the companies, but I'm not going to do that. So what else do you say? You are honest and tell about any problems along the way. I try to be honest. Since I started YouTube, you'll see different extremes of me. Just trying to experiment with YouTube. Part part of me was like, okay, if I'm on YouTube, do I need to put on some type of character? Because do I care about attracting people? Do I have to get animated? Like you'll see different extremes, different. You'll see me trying out different things on YouTube. Some of which have been, uncomfortable, but you just have to try, right? It's called tests. So I appreciate, the encouragement. What else did you say? Some people seem to like the technology so much that they do not put it into a real life test. Yes, they're called architects. um, yeah, so with Elm, I started my journey of learning Elm. I made my declaration to learn Elm 4 months ago, and I mean it's been a wake up call. Like there's a huge difference between doing a code kata and building a FN application or solution, right? And FN stands for functional, but there's a huge difference between doing a code kata, which I used to do a lot of blog posts on, like here's my code kata of building an ATM. Here's my code kata of checkers. Here's a code kata of game of life. And like that stuff, I think is very useful when wanting to learn functional programming. I still stand by it. But there's a huge difference between doing code katas using functional programming and trying to show everybody how awesome you are versus building an actual solution that has a dozen different features. For each feature, there can probably be 20 or more different bugs, and you're trying to basically manage chaos, right? And that's I think that's what software development is all about, is manage chaos. When you have all these bugs that were never really considered, you have these features that you're trying to build in which there's new features that are based on other features because you didn't even see the feature coming until you got the other feature halfway done, right? And so when you're building that using a technology that you want to learn, like things start getting exposed, right? And so, yeah, when I started building the Keza, and I'm still building the Keza, like that's where a lot of the growth comes from, is when you start running into performance concerns. That's the biggest part, is when you're actually building something for other people to use that needs to be useful to them and that they embrace it and they want to use it versus they have to use it. Um, that's something else software is rated on, is do people want to use what you are building, or do people have to use it because it's it's a little bit better than doing things manually. All right, so what else did you say? You said I was fired once for not understanding the architecture. You were fired for not understanding the architecture of uh, of the software that you were supposed to maintain. That was a question. The next question is, did they really have an architecture? I mean, you think about architecture, and architecture, I think some people define as a series of upfront decisions. So I don't know. Did you get fired for not understanding the architecture, or did you get fired because that company didn't have the the automated tests that you could see exactly how the system is supposed to operate, right? If a company has automated tests, then you see exactly what is necessary for that architecture. I stand behind what I say. When I say you see exactly what's necessary for that architecture, if a company has automated tests, you will see how certain features work. You will see the setup required to execute an operation that feature depends on, right? You will see the actual operation that's under test that the feature depends on. It seems kind of redundant. And you will also see what it means for that operation to succeed, right? And so did they fire you because you couldn't get up to speed on the architecture? Or did they fire you as an excuse because you couldn't understand their architecture, because their architecture was fairly complex, and they could have they could have documented their architecture with automated tests so you could see exactly what the setup involved is, exactly what the what a successful operation looks like based on the verification. And all that stuff is documented within an automated test. So I would ask that question, why did they really fire you? Now, if you couldn't understand their tests, well, why couldn't you understand their tests? I think a good automated test is a test that specifies or spells out setup. It spells out the actual operation that's under test, and it spells out what it means to verify that the operation was successful. Again, like, did they have that in place for you to onboard? Because if they didn't, then, well, I wouldn't want to work for that company either. But the majority of companies are like that. The majority of companies are shitty companies, which is why I tend to scrutinize software shops more when I'm interviewing with them, because you can ask me all these interview questions that you want, but you know what? I want to figure out how good you are. I want to figure out what your code base looks like. I want to figure out how disciplined you are. I want to figure out if you just get it or if you just don't get it, right? So, I mean, I'm interviewing with a company right now, and I kind of been pretty anal with them. And so I just had my fourth interview with them. I think we're going into a fifth interview if they still want to go. But like, yeah, I really want to know what your code looks like. I really want to know what you are doing to manage chaos in this field that we call software development. So let me see what else you wrote. He says architecture is such a Orwellian subject. I have to look up that word. Egos can be strong sometimes. Egos are strong because that code base is someone's baby, and no one wants their baby to be called ugly. Like, I'm one of them. I mean, like, I understand where there's growth opportunities. Um, there's just a certain way to address things, and people have to understand that not everything that they do is perfect. They have to understand that. They have to acknowledge that, and they have to be more interested in the truth than they are in their belief system. And in general, I think human beings, they're not truth seekers. They're not. Human beings in general are not truth seekers. So they don't want to be told what could be done better. They want someone to tell them that their system is already good and it doesn't need anything. Then they feel good about themselves, and that feeds their ego. And that's the truth. I've seen it so many times, and I'm sure I've demonstrated it myself. So what else? He said there were serious problems with the tests. Okay, so they did have tests. We had to run the test several times to make sure there were no errors. All right, so the tests, um, those tests were fragile tests, right? Which means that those tests, they couldn't be run in isolation. Those tests, if you had to run those tests several times, then those tests, well, depended on other tests. What else? The state of the database was inconsistent. Well, you can look at Project Nikeza. That's the open source project that I've been working on. And all of my integration tests, they're all isolated, right? I have a teardown. At the end of every test, there's a teardown where it cleans the database so then the next test can run. And the test setup, each test has a setup, and it's going to do whatever it needs to do to set the test up so that it can execute a specific operation that needs to be tested. So there appears to be, based on what I've read, people just didn't know how to write maintainable tests, right? And for me, my test code is a first-class citizen. My test code is just as important as the actual code that my software depends on. Like, my tests, they are vital, right? Without my tests, the software may not get delivered. And so there's a lot of shops, there's a lot of people, they don't have that viewpoint. They think tests can just be throwaway and you don't really need it. But the thing is, well, Look how successful they are. Look at how long it takes them to deliver sustainable, maintainable code. Are people proud? Do people enjoy working within that code base? Or do people like hate working in that code base, right? Those are questions to ask. And I think that those types of questions pretty much determine the grade of a developer. If a developer is really good, then you shouldn't mind working in their code base. If a developer is not that good, usually people don't want to work on their code. People don't want to work with their code, right? So let me see what else you said. Basically, I have wiped somebody's diagram off the whiteboard and started drawing my own version. Well, so yeah, but a di drawing a diagram of what the architecture quote unquote is doesn't mean that the architecture is really that. So I'm not sure which ecosystem you work in. I'm a .NET developer. I am, right? Yeah, I've been working with Elm on my own time because I'm trying to grow myself. But within Visual Studio, and I'm sure probably within like Java IDEs as well, specifically with Visual Studio, you can use static analysis tools. So there's Visual Studio. What is it called? It's Visual Studio Code Map. You run Code Map, and this is part of the enterprise license of Visual Studio. That Code Map is going to generate the architecture for you. It's going to generate the diagram. It's going to generate all the modules, the classes within those modules, the namespaces that those classes are under. It Visual Studio Code Map will generate what the architecture really is and not what someone wanted it to be. And so again, that's the truth versus what someone tries to write on a whiteboard. So I would recommend don't draw any of that and just use the static analysis tools to generate the truth of the architecture. You said you went too far. What else? Refactoring this code is like chatting up his girlfriend. Yeah, I've been there. This is one of the lessons I have learned. You are very correct about people not being truth seekers. It's the truth. It's not just software developers. It's people. This is the reason why we have different religions. Okay, my apologies if I offend you. If you're a very religious person or spiritual person, call it what you want. But people pick their religions versus people basically, for lack of a better term, people pick their religions to accommodate their lifestyle versus people picking their religions because it's undeniable, right? Because everything in that religion they feel is absolutely correct. More is people pick religions to accommodate their fears of death and to accommodate, the things that they have done in the past to make them feel better about themselves. So, I mean, I'm not going to get into religion, but yeah, it's people want to be comforted. They don't want to be told the truth because then they have to make a decision about if they're going to do what's right. And majority of people, they want to be told that they've been doing things right the whole time, and they didn't do anything wrong. And well, those are the people that I try not to hang around. So what else? Which is almost impossible when you're in the workforce, which is why I don't want to work in the workforce anymore. I can't find people that I resonate with, and the people that I would like to work with, they're usually smarter than me, and I can't get into those companies. All right, so sadly in Ruby there is no static analysis tools. Yeah, so all kinds of monsters are permitted by the interpreter. Do you still want to use Ruby? That's my question to you, or any dynamic language. You say discussing it with some people is futile. That is why I want to move to functional programming. Well, so functional programming, I think there's still some dynamic languages. I could be wrong. I could be wrong, but I think Elixir is. I don't think Elixir is a strongly typed language like Scala or F sharp. So, and there's also others like Clojure. I don't think is a strongly typed functional programming language. I think Clojure is a dynamic functional programming language. I could be wrong, right? So functional programming doesn't necessarily mean that the languages are statically typed. It just means that you look at building a system a different way, where by just by nature everything is testable. Doesn't mean that the code that you write is good. It just means that the code that you write can be testable, or can be tested. And so, which is different from object-oriented programming, where if you do the test after approach, you realize, oh, I don't need this. I don't need to test this after all. Well, you say that because your code isn't testable, so that's why you decided not to test it. Completely different when you do functional programming. So you say discussing with some functional or with some people is futile. Yeah, I read that part. At least I will have the compiler on my side. Again, not every functional programming language is statically typed. And then you say, but the values still have the strong type. But the values still have the strong type. I'm not sure, because honestly, I haven't really investigated any of the dynamic. I don't know what I'm saying. I haven't investigated any of the dynamic functional programming languages, so I'm not sure. Honestly, I'm not even interested in entertaining dynamically or dynamic programming languages. Like, I like the compiler doing most of the checks for me. I'm not even going to say most of the checks. I like the compiler assisting me and telling me what I did was wrong. And then I can figure out the logical issues, and what the software is supposed to do, or what the software didn't account for. There's something that is on, I bought the book called Ildris, and Ildris, I think, is like the next generation of functional programming, where like I haven't got past the first chapter because I don't have time. But with Idris, it will actually throw out cases that you need to identify, or that you need to flesh out the domain logic for. It's interesting, but I haven't really had time to go full throttle in it. But it's called Idris. Anyway, you say, but the values still have this strong. Okay, I read that part. Common Lisp is a good example. If I pass wrong value, say 2 instead of, okay, to the string instead of to the number, the interpreter will stop complain about the type of the value and let me correct the problem and continue the execution. Okay. Don't know anything about Lisp though. I think Elm its compiler is really helpful. Elm will tell you that you misspelled um, a name of a value, or you misspelled the name of a function. Well, I'm not sure if it'll tell you if you misspelled the name of a function, but the Elm programming language or the Elm compiler will tell you, hey, I don't know what this value is that you're trying to plug in to this function, but did you mean this value? Right? Elm will do that for you. So, yo, you need to let me record a conversation with you one of these days, because I'm finding it difficult to find people to talk to that I don't know. Anyway, I think I'm about to wrap this up, unless you have any more questions specifically regarding 2 years into me learning functional programming. But it's been real. Thanks for like watching my video and actually like participating, because I just feel like I'm thinking out loud. I don't know that people are actually watching it. So he said Lisp might give you warnings at the compilation state, but only raise the error when you get there. There's no flag that you can toggle so that you can treat warnings as errors. In Visual Studio, I do that. I treat on specific projects. I can go into the configuration settings of a project and flip a switch and say treat warnings as errors, and the compiler will basically spit out all these warnings as errors, and it won't compile. So, which I think all warnings should be treated as errors. I mean, this is me being dogmatic, being a purist, but it just helps to reduce the likelihood of technical debt when you treat warnings as errors, and you have that within your IDE as a feature. So you have no more questions for tonight, and I'm looking forward to your next video. Oh, thank you, Jacek. Hold up, let me scroll back up to figure out the phonetic pronunciation. I thought it was Jacek. Can I scroll up there? I can't find the specific line that you have that told me how to pronounce it. I know the J was definitely pronounced. Yeah, Jacek. Thanks, Jacek. It's been real. And I'm curious what you're doing, what problems you're solving, if you have a blog post, if you do videos. If not, why not? And I guess we could talk about that at a later time. So with regards to Lisp, there have been discussions about it due to the language design that it's not possible to be dogmatic about the warnings. Got it. Don't know anything about Lisp, but there's in the Lambda cartel, well, what used to be the Lambda cartel, he was actually on Developer on Fire 2 weeks ago. His name is Pablo Rivera. You can find him on Twitter. He got into functional programming with Lisp. He actually talks about it on Developer on Fire podcast that he was on 2 weeks ago. You say you got a few videos on your channel. All right, I'll check it out, and hopefully maybe you and I can record a conversation, because I miss talking to people. I do. So good stuff, Jacek. And I'm about to hop off, but thanks for watching my video, and thank you for encouraging me to make more. A lot of the times I just like to do a brain dump, basically to document my thinking via a video, and it helps me. The more I speak my thoughts, the more I can internalize it, so that eventually it could go into autopilot, and I spend less time thinking, because it just becomes muscle memory. And that's something that I never really discovered with maintaining a blog or doing videos. But the more you write, the more you say something, eventually it becomes muscle memory, and you just go into autopilot, and you don't even have to think about what you're saying. It just flows. So the Pac-Man introspection. I don't know what Pac-Man SS introspection is, but that's it. So I'm about to hop offline. Again, I really appreciate your encouragement, and I am killing this broadcast right now.